Hi, Miss Gilmore's class. I think you're second graders. I am Mrs. Frank. I am your teacher's BFF. Okay, you can tell that I'm a lot older than your teacher. In fact, I have been a teacher and school counselor for 35 years. This is to be my last year of working in the schools. So I love books. I was a reading teacher before I became a counselor. And when your teacher asked me to read to you, absolutely. I love books, like I said, but I have a hard time figuring out which one I love the most. There are so many good books, and I hope you're doing a lot of reading while you can't be in school. Great thing to keep your mind occupied and active. I went back to an oldie but a goodie. When I was about your age, I had an elementary school teacher who read this book to me. So I'm not reading you the whole book, I'm reading you the first chapter, and maybe you will want to do some exploring either in that book or the guy who this book is about. The book is called Appleseed Farm, and it's written by Emily Taft Douglas. And just to take the story a little bit farther about this book, after my elementary school teacher read this book to me, I loved it so much. I told my mom all about it. At the time, my mom was studying to become a teacher, and she bought the book to read it to her students. So that's how I got a copy of this book. It's called Appleseed Farm. Penny frowned as the wet apple slipped out of her fingers again. Jelly making is hard work, Aunt Millie said, and this kitchen is hot. She smiled at Penny. Take an apple and run down to the spring for a while. You've helped enough. Penny gladly laid down her knife and chose a big red apple. Why do you make so much jelly anyhow, Aunt Millie? She asked a bit crossly. You said that you always made more than you and Grandfather needed. Well, I give some to the Johnsons, Aunt Millie explained, and some to old Mrs. Brown, and of course, I want some extra for gifts and treats. And I want to show you the picture that goes along with it. Like I said, it's an oldie, but it's a goodie. Penny did not wait to hear more. She left the kitchen and skipped off to the spring. It was her favorite place on the farm. No matter how hot it was everywhere else, it was cool here. The water made a cheerful chattering sound. She crouched down to take a drink in her hands, not bothering to use a cup. Then she curled herself up on Grandfather's wooden bench. Here she felt as though she were in a private place, a place of her very own. Penny munched her apple slowly and thought about many things. If Aunt Millie would spend less time making jelly to give away, she would have more time to make herself stylish. Into Penny's mind flashed a picture of her own mother. She saw her with a new hat perched just right on her blonde waved hair and her traveling bag in her hand. She could almost hear her mother saying, "Goodbye, Penny. We'll miss you awfully, but you'll be happy on Appleseed Farm this summer while Dad and I are in New York working for the United Nations." And then they had all called goodbye, and Mother had driven off to the airport to take her plane. If they could have found an apartment, Penny might have gone too, but Dad had written that the city was crowded and that anyhow there would be nothing for Penny to do all day while Mother and he were busy. Still, it was hard to have her parents off in New York while she was left behind on Appleseed Farm with Grandfather and Aunt Millie. Penny took the last bite of her apple. Then she arranged the seeds in a row beside her on the bench and repeated the funny counting out rhyme which Grandfather had taught her. Intry, mintry, mintry, mow, apple seed and apple sow, sit and sing by the spring, O-U-T, out. She flipped away the first seed and began again. Intry, mintry, quintry, corn, apple seed and apple thorn, sit and sing by the spring, O-U-T, out. She flipped away a second seed and went on, sang the verses and flipping away apple seeds until she had come to the last one. Now, what's the good of you? Penny scolded. I saved you from all the rest, but you're just like all the others. She held the little black seed between her fingers and scowled at it. What's the good of an apple seed anyhow? She asked. Lots of good, answered a cheerful voice behind her. Penny jumped. It was Aunt Millie. She was wiping her hot face with her apron. The juice is dripping from the jelly bag, she announced, and I'm nearly as cooked as the apples. Hand me a drink. There's a good Penny. Penny scrambled for the cup and brought it back full of icy water. What is the good of an apple seed, Aunt Millie? She asked again. The answer to that question lies in a story, Aunt Millie said as she sipped the cold spring water. It's a story about your great-grandmother and what happened to her when she was a little girl. That's a long way back, 100-odd years, and the story happened right here. Penny looked up hopefully. It's an important story, Aunt Millie went on, and one that you should know. Important, Penny echoed doubtfully. That's what Grandfather says about Dad's work at the United Nations. But that's in New York. How could anything important happen way out here? Aunt Millie's blue eyes flashed. She spoke quickly and in a firm voice. Of course your father's work at the United Nations is important, Penny. It's for the peace of the world. I'm proud of his part in that, and I'm proud of our nation's part. But our country became great because brave men and women dared to leave their safe homes and come west. They pushed back the frontier and built up this mighty nation. Aunt Millie looked across the spring to the orchard. Do you know that our people carved this farm out of the wilderness? And do you know why it's called Appleseed Farm? Penny shook her head. Tell me, she begged. It's all part of the same story, Aunt Millie went on. You can see the very places I'll tell about. The spring was here, splashing out fresh water. This fine clump of elms was here, and there were morning glories just like these by the creek. The flowers and the birds were much the same, although everything was wilder. There were still some wolves and foxes prowling in the thickets, and except for this clearing around the house, there was a tangle of brush and prairie grass as far as one could see. Was it this same house where you and Dad were born? Penny asked as she tried to picture Appleseed Farm 100 years ago. Oh dear no, said Aunt Millie. There was just a little log cabin. Your great-great-grandfather, Tom Bartlett, built it with the help of his 12-year-old son. And there, Penny dear, is where the story begins. But let's start all over in the proper once-upon-a-time way. Are you comfortable? It's going to be a long story. Penny stood up so that she could sit down again, this time propped against Aunt Millie's arm. I'm ready, she said. Once upon a time, what happened? Once upon a time, Aunt Millie began, there was a little girl about your age. And that's the end of the first chapter. Just to give you a little idea of more of what's happening, the cover of the book always tells you so much about what's inside. And this one says, Penny changes her mind about the importance of life on Appleseed Farm when she hears Aunt Millie's story, the exciting story of the beginnings of the Bartlett's Indiana farm. It starts with Ida Bartlett, Penny's great-great-grandmother's 10th birthday. That day, Ada met two strangers, one an unfriendly Indian, the other the gentle wanderer who brought Ada and her family a gift far greater than the pink hair ribbon that he pulled out of his knapsack. Appleseed Farm brings this Midwest pioneer family very close to us through their loneliness, their hardships, their happiness. We feel the beauty of the prairie too, wild and tangled at first, but ending with the glory of an orchard in full bloom. If you haven't guessed, this story has a lot to do with a guy whose name was John Chapman. John Chapman walked across Indiana, Ohio, several states, and everywhere he went, he planted apple seeds, apple trees, and he became known as Johnny Appleseed. Now, this book was fascinating to me. When I was your age, I lived in Indiana, and later on moved to Ohio, and let me tell you what, I have been to the grave of Johnny Appleseed. It is in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I have been to a grove of apple trees, an orchard, and it was planted hundreds of years ago by Johnny Appleseed. It's very exciting, very special. I love a good apple, and I think you probably do too. This book, exciting. If you can find a copy of it, maybe not, but maybe you can learn more about Johnny Appleseed. He's an exciting kind of guy from the history of the United States. Well, I appreciated reading to you. Hopefully, you are taking care of yourself and doing well, working together well as a family during this time. It was good talking to you today.